Welcome, everyone, to another installment of AFF-CNY's pre-conference interview series. I am Shaman Vizzi. Restorative Justice Healing Circle Process. That's the title of the next workshop presentation. Let's just dive into the interview and see what the circle process actually is. So let's welcome our next workshop presenter. Grace, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everyone in the community how you're actually connected to adoption or foster care?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Grace Suming Sekulidis. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a transracial adoptee who was adopted from the Hunan province of China back in 1998. And I was raised in Michigan by a white family.
So I see on your bio, let's talk a little bit about who you are. I see that you have a master's in social work and you work for the Office of Student Conflict Resolution. What exactly is that?
Yeah, so that is through the University of Michigan. So I reside in Michigan, the state of Michigan, as I know this is based out of New York. And we deal with all forms of voluntary conflict, so student organization conflicts, conflicts around the way racism is managed, microaggressions in the classrooms and student organizations, to more formal conflict resolution, things related to like alcohol or other drugs usage for underage students. But specifically, I focus on the more voluntary side of conflict resolution within our community.
So I see that your topic has a lot to do, and you see that I see something to do with restorative justice. So for those of us who don't exactly know what exactly that means, why don't you explain a little bit about that? It's just giving you a background of who you are. That's why I'm asking these specific questions, just so you know.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So restorative justice is a practice that is originated in across First Nations and Indigenous peoples and communities all across the world. But specifically the restorative justice practices that the Office of Student Conflict Resolution, or OSCR, the place that I work at, has adapted practices from the Ojibwe people and people related to the continent of North America in a way of managing conflict in a equivalent of the balance between individual accountability, community accountability, and navigating harm, and what does it mean to repair harm, and not from a punitive standpoint. What does it mean from a community standpoint, and what does it mean as an individual standpoint to repair harm when harm is done?
How did you take your lived experience as an adopted person and do this for Michigan State, right? I want to make sure that I said that right.
University of Michigan.
University of Michigan. I apologize to anybody out there from Michigan. Got to get that right. I know colleges are very, so how did you transition to something like that?
Yeah, so I got my master's in social work and I graduated during the pandemic. So the joys of being unemployed in a pandemic. And then I started working with people who were returning from the carceral state and were reintegrating into the community. And our work had a very restorative justice-based practice in terms of how the community, because a community, like nothing happens in a vacuum. So when something occurs, there's a community level of accountability, like there was a lack of resources, there's this, and it can go on in terms of like micro, meso, macro system impacted. And then I transitioned over to doing restorative justice, serving just a different population, to focusing on the U of M community. And in terms of my own identity as a fellow transracial adoptee, that restorative practices, specifically what I'll be doing is circle process within restorative practices, is rooted again in First Nations and Indigenous peoples. And it is a way, there's a variety of formats of it, but the one that I'll mostly be doing is one that's more about community healing and community sharing of stories. So as adoptees and people who are part of the foster care system, we've experienced a lot of lived trauma. And what does that mean as an adoptee? What does it mean in terms of your identity? I know for myself, being a transracial adoptee, there's a lot of nuances related to that in terms of identity development. And a circle process is just a way for people to all be in community, to even out the playing fields, to do its best to manage to even out power dynamics. And that is just how I would say it's connected.
The last thing is, so for everyone in the community, why do you feel that this is a topic or a presentation that everyone would benefit from?
I think everyone will benefit from it, regardless of your relationship to adoptees and or people in the foster care system, is because it is a chance to just be in community. It's my workshop is not going to just be me, will not just be a presentation in terms of education. It will also be majority of the time engaging with each other and engaging as a group and as a community, in terms of hearing stories. What does it mean? So if you're thinking about adopting, like what are things you need to think about if you adopt someone from a different race? Like what is the impact of that? Because that is the reality of the world we live in, and we need to think about that. And then for adoptees, just a chance to, I know I've always benefited from building community and hearing other people's stories to feel like you're less alone. At least that is experience I grew up, being one of very few adoptees in my area, being like, oh wow, that feeling was not just like a weird fluke. It was something that other people experience. And so it makes you feel less, at least for myself, has made me feel less alone, in terms of my development as a human. And so the circle just really provides the opportunity to talk about that in a structured format that allows all voices to be heard and to help navigate, especially for like taking up space, and certain stories can be dominant narratives versus non-dominant narratives.
Stop the recording.